The Enlightenment is also known as the Age of Reason. It's the name given to a period of discovery and learning that flourished among Europeans and Americans from about 1680 to 1800. It changed the way they view the world. Kant specifically identified enlightenment with the process of thinking for oneself, to employ and rely on one's own intellectual capacities in determining how to believe and how to act. The movement in itself was centered around the idea that reason is the primary source of authority and legitimacy, and it advocated for ideals such as liberty, progress, tolerance, fraternity, constitutional government, and separation of church and state. So basically, all these words that we think of when we think of modern democracies, they have come from this particular movement, as this movement is the one that popularized it across Europe and America. In fact, these ideas spread so quickly and so strongly that it led to two revolutions within the time frame of 100 years. The American Revolution, which began in 1775 and lasted up to 1783, was deeply rooted in Enlightenment ideals, particularly those advocating for natural rights, democracy, and self-governance. It was majorly inspired by British philosophers. So before I discuss the revolution, I would like to discuss the philosophers first, so we know what we're talking about. So first we discuss about John Locke. He was perhaps the most important philosopher during the Enlightenment period because his theories of natural rights, the social contract, and government of consent formed the foundation of revolutionary thought. His work, Two Treatises of Government, written in 1689, provided the ideological basis for rejecting absolute monarchy and advocating for popular sovereignty. After him comes Thomas Paine, a British-born thinker who later moved to America, and he played a crucial role in spreading revolutionary ideals through his pamphlet Common Sense, published in 1776. His work argued that British rule was oppressive and that independence was both natural and necessary for American colonies. Other British thinkers were Edmund Burke and David Hume. Edmund Burke distinguished between justified and radical revolutions, particularly when critiquing the excess of the French Revolution while supporting the American Revolution. Meanwhile, David Hume, with his skepticism about absolute monarchy and his emphasis on individual liberty, influenced political thinkers who sought to limit government power. Now, I won't say these were the only philosophers that created a revolutionary fervor within the Americans and their need to want individual rights and liberty, but these are the thinkers that had majorly inspired the Americans. The revolutionaries believed that all individuals were entitled to life, liberty, and property. All of these were considered to be fundamental rights that no government could violate. This belief fueled the colonies' rejection of the British rule, because they viewed King George III's policies as oppressive and unjust. The principle of taxation without representation was another major grievance, as the colonies were being taxed by the British Parliament without having elected representatives to voice their concerns. The revolutionaries also embraced republicanism, arguing that legitimate government must be based on the consent of the governed, not on hereditary monarchy. Additionally, Locke's idea of the right to revolution played a crucial role. If a government becomes tyrannical and fails to protect its citizens' rights, the people had a moral duty to overthrow it. This concept was explicitly stated in the Declaration of Independence written in 1776, which declared that all men are created equal and have the right to self-rule. While the reality of equality was limited at the time, since slavery was still prominent in America, these ideals would go on to influence future democratic movements worldwide. Now, it's not that the American Revolution just affected the Americans. It also changed the lives of many British people. The American Revolution had a profound impact on British literature, shaping political discourse and literary themes in the years that followed. Many British writers, particularly satirists like Jonathan Swift and William Blake, began critiquing monarchy, imperialism, and oppression more openly. The revolution raised questions about the legitimacy of absolute rule, inspiring British writers to explore themes of freedom, resistance, and human rights in their works. Additionally, the revolution shifted British perspectives on colonialism and empire. As Britain lost its American colonies, it began re-evaluating its role as an imperial power. This led to later debates on governance, independence movements, and the ethics of imperial rule. Discussions that would continue throughout the 19th century, especially in response to other anti-colonial movements. Meanwhile, in the 18th century, Industrial Revolution began. It transformed economies, leading to urbanization, social changes, and economic shifts that influenced religious and political thought. The social disruptions caused by industrialization led to a spiritual crisis and revivals, particularly in England and America in the 1730s to 1740s, which saw the First Great Awakening. You see, by the early 18th century, the Church of England had become formal and rigid, focusing on doctrine rather than personal spirituality. Many clergy were indifferent or corrupt, leading to a spiritual void among the people, and this void was filled by deism and Enlightenment rationalism, prompting a religious counter-movement. Deism is mostly associated with Enlightenment, viewing God as a distant creator. According to deism, we can know by the natural light of reason that the universe is created and governed by a supreme intelligence. However, although the supreme being has a plan for creation from the beginning, the being does not interfere with creation. The deist typically would reject miracles or religious doctrine. Thus, a deist typically would reject the divinity of Christ, because it's repugnant to reason. The deist would demote the figure of Jesus from agent of miraculous redemption to extraordinary moral teacher. In opposition to deism, some important thinkers of Enlightenment, notably Shaftesbury and Rousseau, present religion as founded on natural human sentiments rather than on the operations of the intellect. This natural religion, opposed to the artificial religion enforced by their institutions, is often classed as a form of deism, but it deserves a separate mention. This is known as fideism, that is the philosophical view that religious belief relies primarily on faith rather than reason. Human reason is either incapable of knowing God or is unnecessary for religious belief. Orthodox Christianity, in response, sought to reaffirm traditional beliefs, leading to that conflict between faith and reason that we so often see in the Enlightenment literature and thought. Religious leaders sought to reignite personal faith and counteract the growing influence of deism and skepticism. This revival was seen in two movements, Methodism and Evangelicalism. Founded by John Wesley and John Whitefield, Methodism emphasized personal faith and social reform. Evangelicalism is a broader movement, but this also promoted personal relationship with God, missionary work, and your moral responsibilities as human beings and good Christians. The Enlightenment is often portrayed as being opposed to religion, but it is more accurately understood as a movement that is critically directed against certain aspects of religion, like superstition, fanaticism, enthusiasm, and supernaturalism. Rather than rejecting religion entirely, many Enlightenment thinkers sought to establish a rational or natural religion purified of these elements. Even Voltaire, one of the most vocal critics of religion, primarily targeted the Catholic Church in France rather than religion itself. His famous phrase, "Écrasez l'infâme, crash the infamous," was directed at the Church rather than belief in higher power. However, debates over the reasonableness of religious beliefs, particularly Christianity, and discussions about religion's proper place in society were central to Enlightenment thought. The religious conflicts and wars of early modern Europe were, in a sense, transferred to the intellectual realm, where they became the subject of philosophical debate. The rise of Protestantism played a crucial role in shaping Enlightenment, alongside the rise of modern science. Protestantism promoted a form of individual liberty in matters of faith, challenging the paternalistic authority of the Catholic Church. The concept of liberty of conscience, a fundamental Enlightenment value which asserted against all forms of religious and political authority, can be traced back to this Protestant challenge. However, while Protestant reformers grounded their authority in Scripture, Enlightenment thinkers increasingly questioned the literal interpretation of the Bible. The progress of natural science made a strict, literal reading of scripture increasingly difficult to defend. So while we tend to see the Enlightenment as replacing religious and traditional authority with reason, in reality it also faced a crisis of authority in all forms of belief. This tension is best seen in David Hume's skepticism, particularly in A Treatise of Human Nature written in 1739, and Inquiries Concerning Human Understanding written in 1748. Hume's skepticism questions the foundations of knowledge, causation, and human understanding, showing that even reason itself has limits. His works highlight the Enlightenment's self-critical nature, where thinkers not only challenge religion, but also question the reliability of reason and empirical knowledge. The epistemology of the Enlightenment reflects a tension between religious and human-centered knowledge. Descartes' "I think, therefore I am" shifts focus from God to self-knowledge, but still relies on God as the foundation of knowledge. However, Hume fully replaces the knowledge of God with the study of human nature. Hume describes the science of man as effectively a foundation for all sciences, since all sciences lie under the cognizance of man and are judged of their powers and faculties by man. In other words, since all science is human knowledge, scientific knowledge of humanity is the foundation of the sciences. Hume attacked reason as a faculty of knowledge. Reason is attributed to other animals as well. Belief is shown to be grounded in custom and habit, and free will is denied. So even as knowledge of humanity supplants the knowledge of God as the keystone of the system of knowledge, the scientific perspective of humanity starkly challenges humankind's self-conception as occupying a privileged position in the order of nature. In fact, this became such an important topic of discussion during the Enlightenment that Enlightenment satire usually focused on this. Alexander Pope's famous couplet in an essay on man, written in 1733, says, "Know then thyself, presume not God to scan, the proper study of mankind is man." It expresses well the intense interest that humanity gained in itself with the context of the Enlightenment, as a partial substitute for its traditional interest in God and the transcendent domain. Just as the sun replaces the earth as the center of our cosmos in Copernicus's cosmological system, humanity replaces God at the center of humanity's consciousness in the Enlightenment. But there's a little twist here. You see, on one hand, the achievements of natural sciences in general are great pride of the Enlightenment, manifesting the excellence of distinctively human capabilities. The pride and self-assertiveness of humanity in Enlightenment is showing how humanity is making the study of itself as its central concern. On the other hand, the study of humanity in the Enlightenment typically yields a portrait of us that is opposite of flattering. Instead of being represented as occupying a privileged place in nature, as made in the image of God, humanity is represented as a fully natural creature, devoid of free will, of an immortal soul, and of a non-natural faculty of intelligence or reason. The very title of Géo de la Maîtrise, Man a Machine, written in 1748, for example, seems designed to deflate human self-conception, and in this respect it is characteristic of the Enlightenment science of man. It is true of a number of works of Enlightenment, perhaps especially works in the more radical French Enlightenment, which is painting a portrait of humanity that dramatically deflates its traditional self-image as occupying a privileged position in nature. Coming back to Hume, Hume's skepticism was responded to by Kant, by trying to define the limits of human knowledge while still defending reason. In his Critique of Pure Reason, written in 1781, he asks, how is scientific knowledge possible? Since experience only shows what happens, how do we know what must happen? Known as causality. And neither experience nor logic alone can explain necessary causal laws. So he proposes that our minds shape how we perceive reality. This belief that reality is shaped by the mind leads to the birth of German idealism. You can find my lecture on German idealism here. Now, Kant's work represents a revolution in epistemology. Kant rescues rational knowledge by limiting it to the natural world. That we can only have knowledge of things we experience. We cannot have knowledge of God, of the soul, or anything beyond experience. Now this leads to Kantian idealism, which again I will talk about in my lecture on Kant. From 1730s to 1740s, we would see the rise of sentimentalism, which was a reaction to both rationalism and the harsh realities of industrialization. I have previously done a lecture on that, which you can find here. In 1740s, pre-Romanticism movement would also emerge as a transition from sentimentalism to Romanticism. I have also done a lecture on that, which you can find here. In 1780s, specifically 1789, suddenly the French Revolution erupted and became a political and social upheaval that challenged monarchy, aristocracy, and traditional authority, deeply influencing Romantic thought. Many Romantic writers like Wordsworth and Coleridge were initially inspired by its ideals like liberty, equality, and fraternity. And thus, right after the French Revolution, Romanticism was born in the 1780s, which lasted till 1837. The Enlightenment period was also a time when Britain became a global power and grew wealthy. A significant part of that wealth came from Britain's colonial empire and its active involvement in the transatlantic slave trade. The American and French revolutions were directly inspired by the Enlightenment ideals, and respectively marked the peak of its influence and the beginning of its decline. The Enlightenment's important 17th century precursors included the Englishmen Francis Bacon and Thomas Hobbes, the Frenchman René Descartes, and the key natural philosopher of scientific revolution like Galileo Galilei, Johannes Kepler, and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. The roots of Enlightenment are usually traced to 1680s England, when in the span of 3 years, Isaac Newton published his Principia Mathematica and John Locke published his Essay Concerning Human Understanding. 2 works that provided the scientific, mathematical, and philosophical toolkit for the English Enlightenment's major advances. Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica, which very briefly described motions of heavenly bodies. Newton's system strongly encourages the Enlightenment conception of nature as an orderly domain, governed by strict mathematical dynamical laws, and the conception of ourselves as capable of knowing these laws and plumbing the secrets of nature through the exercise of our unaided faculties. His early success in the Enlightenment of subsuming the phenomena of nature under universal laws of motion encourages the conception of nature as a very complicated machine whose parts are material and whose motions and properties are fully accounted for by deterministic causal laws. There was no single unified Enlightenment. Instead, it is possible to speak of the French Enlightenment, the Scottish Enlightenment, and the English, German, Swiss, or American Enlightenment. Individual Enlightenment thinkers often had very different approaches. Locke differed from Hume, Rousseau differed from Voltaire, Jefferson differed from Frederick the Great. However, their differences and disagreements emerged out of the common Enlightenment themes of rational questioning and belief in progress through dialogue. Montesquieu and Buffon gave their own different philosophies. The signature publication of the period was Diderot's Encyclopedia, which brought together leading authors to produce an ambitious compilation of human knowledge. The Encyclopedia was a monumental intellectual project that embodied the core ideals of the Enlightenment. It was designed as a comprehensive compilation of human knowledge and sought to promote reason, empirical science, and secular thought while challenging traditional authorities such as church and the monarchy. By advocating religious tolerance, freedom of thought, and scientific inquiry, it played a crucial role in shaping modern intellectual discourse. Additionally, it helped democratize knowledge, making education more accessible beyond the elite classes. And therefore, the encyclopedia became a symbol of Enlightenment progress. The French Revolution of 1789 was the culmination of the High Enlightenment vision of throwing out the old authorities to remake society along rational lines. but it devolved into bloody terror and showed the limits of its own ideas and led to the rise of Napoleon. Still, its goal of egalitarianism attracted the admiration of early feminist Mary Wollstonecraft and inspired both the Haitian War of Independence and the radical racial inclusivism of Paraguay's first post-independence government. Enlightened rationality gave way to the wilderness of Romanticism, but 19th century liberalism and classicism, not to mention 20th century modernism, all owe a heavy debt to the thinkers of the Enlightenment. This was all about the Enlightenment movement. If you'd like to know the various subsets of the Enlightenment movement, have a look at these lectures.